Today's question is, do I really need an expensive reamping box? Do I need to spend a lot of money to connect my audio interface to my guitar amp? And you know what? I totally expected to do a video where I tell you how important it is to use something like this, but I'm a little confused because my tests have really surprised me. But first things first, I'm pretty sure that a lot of you guys, be honest, don't exactly know how a reamping box works and what it is exactly doing to your signal, how it can affect your guitar tone. So I want to start with explaining what a reamping box is, what the job of a reamping box is, and then we're going to do some listening tests that might surprise you as well. Welcome, boys and girls. I highly recommend to watch the entire video to fully understand what I'm talking about and what I'm going to show you. But I know that some of you guys have a TikTok attention span, so I've added some chapters below. I want to start with explaining what a reamping box is. We use it to connect our audio interface to our guitar amps. We are sending DI signals from the digital world, from our DAW through our audio interface into a guitar amp. And you know what? These two speak different languages, or at least they speak a different dialect. On the studio side, we've got balanced, high-level, low-impedance signals. And on the guitar side, we've got high-impedance, low-level, unbalanced signals. And we need some kind of translation between these two worlds, and that's what our reamping device will do for us. That means there are basically three things that need to be translated. First of all, the levels need to be corrected. A studio signal, a line level signal, is much hotter than a guitar signal. If we send that into a guitar amp, it's not going to sound good. It's going to sound very distorted and broken. Then we have a balanced signal that needs to be unbalanced somehow. And finally, we have different impedances. And we want the amp to see a virtual guitar. We want the guitar amp to behave like there's a guitar connected. So ideally, the output signal of our reamping device will have the same impedance like a guitar pickup. Those are the three things that need to be handled by the reamping device. Let's start with the first one. Let's see if we can find a cheaper alternative. Most reamping boxes have some kind of level adjustment here. The passive ones basically just have a passive attenuation, which means you can bring the level down. And you might say, that's easy. Why do I need a reamping box if I just need to make something more quiet? Why can't I just pull down the fader in my DAW? And that is correct. You can actually do that. There's just one problem. If you reduce the level in the digital domain before you hit the DA converter, you will also reduce the resolution of your converter and you might introduce noise. This is normally not a problem at all. But if you are sending a signal into a fully cranked guitar amp, there's a lot of amplification, and that means you will hear every dB of noise. Everything will be extremely amplified. So it's always recommended to leave your reamped signal in the digital domain as high as possible, hit your converters as hard as possible without clipping them, and then you want to reduce or attenuate the level of your signal after the DA converter in the analog domain before we hit the amp without the need of a dedicated reamp, right? All we have to do is put some kind of attenuation in between the converter and the amp. And this could be active or this could be passive. The cheapest thing I found that you could use for this was a passive monitor controller for 29 euros. So this should work for bringing down the level and you're not going to lose any resolution. At least in theory. We will try this later. So for 29 bucks, this would take care of the first translation job of our reamping box. Let's move on to the second one, and that's maybe the easiest one, and that is turning a balanced signal into an unbalanced signal. The best way to do this is to use a dedicated transformer. because this will isolate perfectly. But there are other ways to do this. You can solder special cables, or maybe even easier, maybe your audio interface already has an unbalanced analog output. Then this problem is more or less solved. Or if we look back at our $29 studio monitor controller, we will see it does have balanced inputs and unbalanced outputs. Perfect, right? But unfortunately, there is another problem. Every reamping box that I know has a ground lift switch. By the way, I don't like the radial boxes. You always need a pen for this. I don't like this. And this is extremely important because very often when you connect your audio interface to your audio interface is grounded by itself or through the computer, your amp is grounded, you can create a ground loop. And this is like an antenna that picks up a lot of hum and shit. And this can be removed by a ground lift switch. That is the proper way of doing it. Don't clip any cables or do any stuff like that. That is the proper way of doing it. And you really need that 50% of the time. There's always one setting that sounds better than the other one. Let's have a listen, before and after. So no reamping without a ground lift. But you know what? There's another cheap box that we can get. This one for $35 from Millennium. Passive, balanced in, balanced out box with a ground lift switch. So that would solve this problem. There's also something from Palmer, I think, a box that takes care of unbalancing your signal and also has a ground switch. But this is already $80 or something. And the problem already is that right now, I think we are around 60 something euros, and you can get a really good sounding reamping box already for something like $75. So we're already hitting the roof here. It already starts making no sense anymore to look for alternatives. But anyway, let's keep on doing this because there's a third thing that needs to be fixed. And that is the impedance. And I'm not actually sure how much of an actually audible difference the impedance makes. But of course, it totally makes sense that the output of a reamping box that you plug into your guitar amp has a similar output impedance like a pickup. I think this one has around 5 kilo ohm. And if you just use a line level device, you might have an output impedance of 50 ohm or 100 ohm, so much lower than this. And at least in theory, it totally makes sense that your guitar amp might behave differently connected to a line level device than to be connected to something like this. And to be honest, I'm not aware of any device, any impedance converting device that would turn like a lower impedance into something higher. Maybe you know something like this. I don't, except for a reamping box. And here we are. So so these are the three things that a reamping box needs to do. Bring down the level, that can be done in the analog domain, and unbalance the signal can also be done. We have the ground lift, which is really important, can also be done. And then we have some kind of impedance matching, and here it gets difficult. So let's have a listen. So here we are in Cubase, and we are right inside my little reamping lab project where I'm comparing a lot of different reamping boxes, their noise, their distortion, their sound, but this is for another video. Let's just go here. Here I have reamped the same DI signal through very different setups, okay? And the first thing I want to compare is the noise and the hum, like how clean a dedicated reamping box sounds compared to the alternatives I talked about. Let's start with the real deal, this one. This is the noise we get. This is, just for fun, the Palmer Trave box. Which has a little buzz in there. The radial is just a touch cleaner. Now, what happens if I just pull down the digital fader in my DLW? Let's have a listen. Not good, right? We don't have a ground lift, And we've just pulled down the fader, which might add noise because we are reducing the resolution of our converter. So next thing I did from this was to add this box here. You could use something else, which functions as a ground lift. This is a Lele, what is it called? P-split. And we went from this to this. Now you understand why you really want to have a ground lift, because this is terrible. Okay, now the hum is gone. But as expected, we are much more noisy than, let's say, the Radial. And that is a massive difference, especially if you play something like this. Have a listen. Like ringing palm mutes. This is where the noise creeps in and you can't really do much about it. Except for denoising, of course. But, you know, if we can avoid that, we will. So the digital setup, just pulling down the fader in your DAW, is way more noisy. I've tested that several times, always with the same results. Compared to... Now, the next step was to attenuate the signal after the conversion. And I tried a few different devices to do that. And it was interesting to see that they all have different noise profiles and more or less noise. And the best thing I found was an EQ, where I bypassed all the EQ bands and just used the output to bring down the signal. And from there, I was going into the amp. Sounds like this. And you guessed it, no ground lift. With a ground lift, it sounds like this. And this is much better than just pulling down the digital fader. If we go back to digital, much better, but still way more noisy than our reamping box. I simply could not find a setup that sounded cleaner than this. That was the cleanest of them all in this setup. I mean, I guess it also depends on the amp and the level of your converters and stuff. But for me, this was exactly what I expected. The cleanest solution for avoiding hum and hiss is a dedicated reamping box. And now I totally expected the reamping boxes also to sound much better, because the digital and the analog setup both don't have any impedance correction, right? So let's have a listen. This is the Radial box. The sound is a Fryette Deliverance 2 Plus going into my upcoming signature speaker, the Eminence Karnivore. By the way, we're going to have a pre-order very soon. You can pre-order the Karnivore very soon. Sign up to my email list below so you don't miss that. Karnivore in a Mesa cab down there, mic with a single 57. Let's just make a little loop so I can switch between the different devices. Let's switch to the digital setup, just pulling down the fader, but I'm only going to play the ones with the ground lift. And to be very honest, I was very surprised to not really hear much of a difference. And I did a lot of testing, and in the beginning I thought like, yeah, I can hear some digital hardness or something, or less resolution, but I did not survive any blind tests. And it's the same with the analog setup. Let's just switch between the Radial box, digital and analog. And if you have to start doing something like this, like A/B tests and blind tests and stuff, then I kind of stop caring, because it really sounds very similar and much more similar than I expected. I kind of wanted this to sound better. So, at least in this setup, maybe I have to do some more tests, but at least in this setup, which is a high gain setup where you normally hear the differences very well, it sounds super close. Even if you do null tests, it sounds super close, really, really close. Even the digital setup, just pulling down the fader, sounds all right. I gotta say that. It sounds all right, this one. Radial. So here is my conclusion. I would say, yes, you do want to have a dedicated reamping box, because not only is it going to sound good, it's also going to sound clean. You know, this is the easiest way to avoid hum and noise. And it's just one little handy box. It's easy to set up and easy to use compared to the workarounds that I had. But does it sound better than just making sure you get an unbalanced signal, reduce the level, and add a ground lift? Unfortunately not. And that has surprised me. Again, I will do more tests, but in this test it was quite clear that I couldn't hear a difference worth mentioning, really. And that has surprised me. So in the next video, I will compare a few different reamping boxes, actually 5 or 6 different reamping boxes, because not only is it important to get a clean signal, there's one thing more that really matters, and that is the level of a box like this, which levels it can take and which levels it can output to the amp. Because especially if you have a consumer USB interface with a rather weak output level, some reamping boxes, like this one, just don't have enough power to drive your amp. Then there are other ones that are more flexible. So there are quite a few parameters that make a big difference between different reamping boxes. Now, after this test, with no reamping box versus a reamping box, I'm not expecting any huge tonal differences between them. But anyway, that's gonna be the next video, because there are reamping boxes starting from like $70 up to something like 300 or 400, you know. That's a lot of money. So that's what we're gonna do next. I'm curious. This has surprised me. Yeah. I really expected the reamping boxes to sound much different. And this sounds to me like the impedance output of the reamping box doesn't do that. Please let me know what you think. Maybe I've done a mistake or something. You let me know. Maybe you have experienced the same, or you have gotten different results. Let me know which tests you have done comparing reamping boxes to other reamping boxes or to other workarounds. That would be really good to know. And I think that's all for today. Links below, as usual, to all the gear that I mentioned. Thanks for watching. Looking forward to reading your comments down there. I see you in hell, motherfuckers. Bye-bye.